All right, so we're running.
All right, I'd like to bring the Board of Education Budget Workshop to order on Tuesday, March 2nd. We have three different departments that we're going to be talking about. So Kevin, I will let you introduce the first one and we'll proceed from there.
Great.
And if just one question, if you could tell us when you want our questions, during the presentation, after, however you want to handle our questions, that would be great.
Yeah, we'll keep this conversational and informal. And so
Okay.
Why don't we start with, as we've done in the past, we'll start with Mrs. Kuhn and Millie Driscoll, and then we'll proceed
Sure.
to Jen, and then I think Andrea and her team is third on the docket.
All right, perfect. Thanks.
Okay, good afternoon, everyone. Did everybody have lunch? I hope so.
Yeah.
I want to make sure everybody's all happy and satisfied and all of that.
I have a
so-
little snack that I'm going to have too.
Okay, perfect. That's so good. You can snack, feel free to snack through my portion and
Hi,
then you'll be all ready for Dr. Falcone when she goes right after me. Ready to go. So, all right. So I'm not sharing, cute pictures of our children, even though I wish I could, but I was told I wasn't supposed to do that. So, but I do want to say I'm incredibly proud of our children this year. They have been so flexible. They have demonstrated all of the mindset traits and more. And I can't even tell you, we are so excited that we've been in for 4 days for this long. And our numbers in our remote classes continue to just go down and down and down. So more and more kids are coming back from remote, and more kids are actually re-enrolling whose parents had chosen to homeschool them. So that's great news at Miller Driscoll. So when it comes to the budget, we look at the budget, we look at our goals when we set our budget. And of course, we want to maintain what we think is our very positive culture and climate. And then we want to make sure that our teachers have exactly what they need to deliver the best instruction in the classroom. And those things come in, professional development, as well as coaching and instructional supports. And then making sure they have the instructional materials they need and the supplies they need. So when we build our budget, that's what we think about. This year, I just want to go over a few highlights from this year. And I just want you to just keep in your head that we're in a global pandemic. And I hope that when I talk about the highlights, you're going to think, oh my gosh, I can't believe all these things are happening, even in a global pandemic. We were very excited to have our additional kindergarten teacher added to our staff this year so that we could keep our K classes at about 18. This year also, all of our teachers started implementing the TC phonics units of study and also got trained in a phonological awareness curriculum and assessment called the Haggerty, which was added on as part of the ELA curriculum review. This year was year 3 as a TC project school with a large focus on phonics. No, that sounds funny. And then also our TC staff developer has been working on ways you reach students again in a global pandemic, whether you're on site and have some limited small group opportunities or whether you're teaching remotely. We're incredibly proud of the work we've done this year in the area of equity and inclusion. So there's been a lot going on there. And again, we're trying to make that work be a little more than just a celebration of Martin Luther King Day or a celebration of Black History Month, but we're looking at ways we can infuse this work throughout the curriculum throughout the year. We did a lot of restructuring of schedules based on COVID, as you know, within the first 5 weeks. Doing all 3 models was so fun. And I have to thank Janine Carley, who is my scheduling master, who just kept changing schedules and changing schedules. And believe it or not, is working on another schedule right now, unless she might be listening in. So the other thing we've continued this year is our work in the area of ruler. So we're doing the charter, we're doing the mood meter. Coming up, we're going to talk about teaching kids the meta moment. These are all things we learned as, the grown-ups learned in year 1. The kids did some of it last year, but we're moving forward with that work as well. We've obviously had to increase our parent communication, both from the classroom teacher level as well as the administrative level, given the fun side of COVID. And then we've also increased our teacher and staff feedback that we've been collecting throughout the year, whether it's classroom teachers, specials teachers, paraprofessionals. We collect a lot of info and then try to kind of compile it and show people what our responses are and get them answers as best as possible. So those are just a few things that have been happening this year, like I said, in a global pandemic with a budget freeze and all of that. For next year, again, I know that Dr. Smith presented in his budget proposal that we're holding on to the possibility of another classroom teacher, adding on another classroom teacher. And again, that would be totally based on enrollment. We had a lot of kiddos who, especially in the kindergarten, in kindergarten, they either left to go to a FIVES program, or they left to enroll in a private school, or they just left and decided to kind of postpone coming to kindergarten, given everything that was going on. So although, you know, the projections don't look much different from where we are this year, we already have 13 kindergarten students who are re-enrolling with the start of K registration, who would have, you know, been in kindergarten last year. So, you know, my crystal ball isn't so great, but I think our numbers are going to be a little higher than everyone, you know.
Kathy, can I ask, do a quick, when you say re-enrolling, mean that they weren't enrolled at all? It's not parents requesting a redo of the year?
It's the kids who were enrolled last year in kindergarten.
Okay.
And then their parents kept them out for, again, and it could be any of those reasons, but they're re-enrolling for kindergarten. We do have some kiddos too whose parents kept them out for kindergarten and either homeschooled them, and some who are re-enrolling then to go into first grade.
Okay.
So there's kind of like, there's kind of a pretty big variety, but already we have 120 kids registered. The registration is online this year, so it's very different than in the past, but 120 already registered. We have about 30 coming up from our pre-K. And again, out of all those numbers, 13 are re-enrollments. And we only opened registration, I think, February 22nd or 23rd. So we haven't had it open very long. So increases for next year, again, I think are pretty minor when you look at our Miller-Driscoll budget. A lot of the increases in our operating budget for next year fall under facilities and maintenance kinds of things. But I do want to highlight a couple of things. We did add on TC running records this year. And so that was an expense, and that will be a little bit of an additional expense next year as we got them for classroom teachers, but we want to make sure our specialists, special education related service, interventionists all have access to those. That's the same also with the Haggerty and the TC phonics units. And I'm just gonna pause here for just a minute, but just indulge me for a minute, because I have to say that the work that my staff has done this year in the area of phonological awareness and phonics is unbelievable. So not only have they gotten trained, but what they are implementing with the kids is incredible. It's incredibly systematic. We're getting some amazing data for all of our students down to such a finite level. I mean, we know if a student can identify rhymes. We know if a student can generate rhymes. We know if a student can identify the beginning sound, the ending sound. We know if a student can take the beginning sound in a word, and if it's sit and change the s to a, and they know it's hit. And they're doing all of these things from a phonological awareness perspective first, which means no letters attached, just all orally. And that practice is incredible. And that's something that I think, you know, we've been missing here at Miller-Driscoll within our regular ed curriculum. It used to be, you got a lot of that if you went to special ed or intervention. And then all of that builds up to what they're doing in the TC phonics units, where again, it's a very explicit instruction in all of the different phonetic components. It goes right along with the phonological awareness. And then the teachers are really finding that what they're learning in these TC Phonics units is transferring very well to their reading and the writing, which was something that we didn't have before as well. So we would see if kids were doing word study, they would learn things and be able to, perform or show what they knew when they knew they were working on word study, but we weren't seeing that transfer. And we're seeing it this year. Again, the amount of information the teachers have, we had a couple of faculty meetings dedicated to looking at this data from a classroom level to say how many students, again, can substitute phonemes like I demonstrated for you, and do I need to do that with my whole class or a small group or maybe just one student? But that's the work that's going on here based on the ELA curriculum review. And again, I think hopefully Dr. Falcone will be very excited as we send these kids up because I think, not only will they have the instruction and the very explicit instruction, but it is also helping us to be able to target those kids who need a little bit of extra support. So that's my PSA on phonological awareness and phonics. Want to talk? Anybody have any questions about that? I'm happy to keep talking about it.
Now, I don't have a question, but I just have to say that we had gotten away from phonics and phonics instruction, and it's critical. It just thrills me that we're getting back to it the way we should, because it's fundamental. It's just basic, and I'm glad to hear that it's working. It's going well. Yeah.
And I think it's the whole part. It's just that it's, another piece of that comprehensive literacy. Yeah. So yes. I don't want anybody to think we're not doing all those other amazing things and building that joy of reading. But this is just another piece that, again, I feel like a lot of my teachers also had to take the Foundations of Reading survey again this year because the state tells us we have to do that. They felt very confident going into it in a very different way also after having this training. So again, in a global pandemic, and they learned all these things, and look at that. So another expense that was added in my budget lines is some additional training for 2 of our reading interventionists in the area of Orton Gillingham. So we have a baseline training for all of the reading interventionists and all of our special education teachers in Orton Gillingham. One of my interventionists would like to move to the associate level, and another reading interventionist I have who is dual certified in both reading and special education. We would actually like to get her training. It will take a few years, but we would like to get her trained to the fellow level so that then we don't have to contract out with our Orton Gillingham trainer that we use now. But instead we would have an in-house person who could provide some of that training, and then we could do some classroom educator training again with somebody in-house. So that's the goal of, the extra money. That's a big chunk of that extra money in my training and conferences budget. In addition, we added, and I think we've been trying to add this for the last couple of years and sometimes it gets cut, but additional monies for culturally responsive texts. To be able to add to our social studies curriculum, as well as our classroom libraries. And again, it fits in with all of the equity and inclusion work that we've been doing over here at Miller Driscoll. Let me just check my notes and see if I forgot anything. Oh, and then next year we would like to continue again as a project school with TC. We have been kind of shifting the monies for TC over the years. So at first we had a lot of teachers who were going to calendar days at Columbia. And now that's shifted a little bit. So there's a little bit more time with the on-site staff developer, which is amazing. And then fewer calendar days as our teachers are, again, getting better and better at workshop and at, delivering the instruction using the TC units. I don't know, Chuck, is there anything I'm forgetting to say?
No, I think you covered it.
All right, so I'll stop talking now, and I'm happy to answer any questions. I may have answered some of the questions you had in the budget question list through my presentation, but happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, Kathy, one message that came through in Kevin's presentation is the idea of learning recovery for next year. So can you speak a little bit about how the budget supports that? And if you think it does enough? And then you spoke, my other question is totally different. You spoke lots and lots about literacy and phonological awareness and TC projects and all of that, which is wonderful. But I didn't hear anything about math, which is a major focus in the district.
Yep.
So I don't know if you could sort of point out what math support is going on. So those would be, and then my third question is just, in your intro, you mentioned that some students were re-enrolling from homeschooling. If you could just refresh us about that number. Okay.
Sure. So right now we have 13 students who are re-enrolling in kindergarten. So, but I would have to go through and look and see if they were withdrawn to either homeschool, to go to a FIVES program, or just, again, kind of to either stay home or continue on in preschool. So I don't know the breakdown of those 13. It's just my secretary was able to tell me those kids had registered last year for kindergarten, and now they're registering again for next year for kindergarten.
Oh, okay. I thought before you were talking about kindergarten, you had said something about as the year progresses, kids are moving more from remote to in person. But I also thought you said some are coming back from being homeschooled. So I could have misheard. So I apologize.
Yeah, there are some who are coming back. Like I had an email today from a parent who had withdrawn her son to homeschool him. And now she said she wants him to come back soon. I mean, this spring. So I think we actually have a lot of kids, like I said, coming out of the remote classes. Right. So those remote only classes. But then we also have parents who had their children out to homeschool who are now saying, everything seems to be going well. The numbers look great. We'd like to, have our kids come back to Miller Driscoll for the rest of this year. Does that answer your question?
Sure. Just if you could just, when tell us what the total number of those students are, because enrollment's a touchy subject for next year when you look at the projection.
Yep. Okay. I can get that and add it to somewhere in that budget question.
Sure.
Or whatever. Okay. So the other thing with math, there's a lot going on around math. We are starting to look at that responsive lesson planning for math, just like I talked about from that reading. The nice part about reading and spelling and phonics and phonological awareness is we have a ton of data. And so we have been working here at Miller Driscoll with Trudy using a program called iReady, which is similar to IXL, but I think much more appropriate for the age of our students anyway. And so most of the classes, the students have taken a diagnostic assessment using that tool. And then what happens is it will show the teacher, here are the students' strengths, here are the students' areas, the areas that they're ready for some instruction. It will provide some lessons, even through the iReady program, as well as some additional, practice through that program. So it's like IXL, but I think it's better again because it has these lessons that the students can access. Teachers can also go in based on the work they're doing in the classroom and assign particular lessons or particular activities to the kids, depending upon, the subject matter that they're teaching at that time. Some other teachers will use it too, because we have found that, one piece of data we have is a lot of the students do really well when we complete the math unit and they take the assessment for that unit. Because they've just done it and it's, fresh in their head. And so what's nice also for iReady is to be able to use it for some kind of systematic review. So if we haven't done shapes for a while, or we haven't done money, or we haven't, done double digit, addition for a while, that's a good way for kids to review. And again, be able to access things electronically. So that's one thing. We did get some training along with the people at Cider Mill around some more efficient ways to analyze the MAP data and be able to use that for some responsive lesson planning. And so when we give that spring MAP test over here at Miller Driscoll, then we'll be utilizing some of those tools that have been added to the NWEA platform to be able to do that. We are right now, we started, oh my gosh, yesterday, March 1st, we started our supplemental math program. And so we have first and second graders coming in before school and working on exemplars and iReady and getting that additional support in math, as well as, the kids who are in intervention, and then the support they get in the classroom through the differentiated instruction. Math is a challenge this year just because a big part of our math program to build fluency, the kids play a lot of games, and that's a little bit harder to do when you can't share materials. So although they love playing where they're like, both team A and team B, it gets a little old a little faster when that happens. And, we usually use a ton of math manipulatives, and now, kids have their own math manipulatives in a baggie. And so there have been some limitations. So I know that, it's a little trickier, but the teachers are finding, fun and creative ways to get by. But that is a little bit trickier.
Can I just ask a quick question?
Sure.
So with the supplemental math program, is the spring map kind of going to be used as the assessment tool of, was the supplemental program enough? Did it get the kids where we need them to be? And then if it hasn't gotten kids where they need to be, is there a place in the budget that provides for what are we going to do come September?
Well, the spring map will not be used for that when it comes to the supplemental math, because the kids will not have had enough sessions of the supplemental math for that to be a good, indicator.
Yeah. Okay.
So the iReady can be used to check on progress, as well as there are rubrics that come along with the exemplar program. And so again, the teachers using exemplars have very specific rubrics that they're using to, track kids' progress. So we see, we're a little different over here. We see a little bit less of a COVID slide when it comes to math. So, we didn't see as much of an impact. I do know that, again, the teachers, especially second grade, our second grade teachers probably saw more of an impact than anyone, only because the first graders being out, getting remote instruction for that last third of the year, there's a lot of building of place value knowledge and things like that. So they had to do a little bit of extra around there, but we didn't see that same COVID slide as I think that we saw in the upper grades.
Yeah. But you feel confident that you have enough flexibility in the budget that you have, that come September, if additional resources or supplement programs need to be, put forward in some way, shape, or form, that that can be done?
Not through my budget, but there might be money somewhere else. My budget is very lean, I'm just gonna say. So, I have budgeted, my budget includes one math interventionist, which is what we have had historically. One instructional coach who does both math and science. So we do have PD in there for mathematics, and that was a little bit bigger of a number than it has been in the past. And again, depending on where we go, I know there was talk with, I have 2 second grade teachers who are currently doing some tutoring for the math supplemental program. One's doing it with first grade and one's doing it with second before school, but they really love exemplars. So they might be very good ambassadors for, bringing that program into the classroom, and, Chuck can talk more about that. But that's pretty exciting.
Is that exemplary program, or exemplary? I'm sure it is, but the supplemental program, is it budgeted for next year?
We didn't carry a specific budget line because the relative dollar amounts are small because we pay hourly salaries. So the intention was to watch it unfold over the next several weeks. And then if it's a success, we'll continue to run it for targeted populations next year.
And then just in terms of like kids coming back that maybe had been like homeschooled or had, missed out in terms of and making sure that they are, curriculum wise at the same place as the other students in the class, we have resources to afford us the ability to give us whatever to help them catch up to wherever they need to be.
Well, we
Well,
have,
Oh,
yeah.
I'm sorry.
No, go ahead.
I mean, I think like with any other students, we have reading interventionists, right? We have a math interventionist. We are lucky at our level. We have a lot of data that we collect on the kids. So it's easier for us to pinpoint exactly where they are, similar to, what Jen will say at Cider Mill. We do have a lot of data on these younger kids. So I feel as though we have things in place to be able to figure out where kids are when they come back. I will tell you, I'm so proud of our remote only teachers, because the kids who have come back out of being in these remote classes for the 2/3 of the year have come back, and it's like, and they're right in it. They're right in it with everyone
That's
else.
great to hear.
Obviously, yeah, homeschool
Yep.
is different. I am
Yes.
a control freak, but I can't control that. So
Yes. Okay.
I'd asked this question sort of earlier on, just in speaking with Kevin, sort of more informally. But again, if an emphasis this year is on learning, recovery and assessing to make sure kids are where they're supposed to be, and it would be wonderful news if they're, if our first grade isn't that different, all of those things are good, but there may be some need. So one question I had asked was some sort of comparison on instructional time this year compared to a normal so-called, year. Realizing that mitigation strategies take time. Wednesdays are obviously different, all of that. So if, I understand there may need to be a major focus on the sort of learning recovery, extra support stuff, but to make that case, it has to be as strong as possible. So again, what data is going to be collected? What class sizes are you aiming for and why? And what instructional time did we not get this year, for a whole host of valid reasons.
well,
Again, I don't need that answer right now, because it's, somebody's gonna have to sit down and figure out minutes, but
right.
I guess what I'm trying to say, not very well, is that it's a larger than normal budget increase. And this is not directed at Miller Driscoll. This is for the whole district. And so we need to build as good a case as possible to the public. So our job as board members is to, just kind of really poke and say, are you sure you need that? Is it enough? Is it too much? What happens if you weren't going to get that? What big challenge are you facing that is going to take, specific resources? So I'm sorry. So I'm directing the questions immediately at you, but I really will try to get at K-12.
And I think we did share info with, I can't remember if it was Chuck or Kevin, that was in a chart somewhere about instructional time.
Sure.
And there has been kind of
fine.
a trade-off, like there has been an impact on instructional time, but then other like transitions and things, we don't have as much time in transitions because art
interesting.
and
Okay.
music and library are going to the classroom. Again, I would change it in a hot second back to how it used to be, but just so you know, it does cut down on a little bit of a transition.
Okay.
I think the other thing too that Gretchen had sent an email about was just the impact of, becoming a project school, and do we have any kind of test data to show that there's, what the increase would be. And so I just got that question, but in just looking at, kind of the percentage of students who scored above the 60th percentile, kind of from a fall to spring, how did that number grow before we had TC, before we were a TC project school, and then after? In spring of 2018, so it would have been the 17-18 school year, in first grade anyway, the number of kids who were at or above the 60th percentile went up by 6% from fall to spring. And then the next year where we were a TC school, that number actually went up by 20% from fall to spring in first grade. Second grade in 2018, it went up by 10%. And then the next year when we were a project school, it went up by 14%. I wouldn't say that's all being a TC project school. I would say that's also the teachers getting more and more comfortable with the TC units, which for reading and writing, they've been doing since I got here to Wilton, and this is my 5th year. They've also gained an incredible amount of knowledge on the, the components of Readers and Writers Workshop and how to use those to address the needs of the students. So I think being a TC project school has helped with the shift, but I think between being a TC project school and having our instructional coaches and the changes in ELA, based on the review, what I see as the biggest shift over the 5 years I've been here is that instead of focusing on, I need to teach these units and I need to do exactly what it says in this unit, the focus is on where are the students and what do they need? And now how do I utilize the components of, comprehensive literacy and the readers and writers and phonics, units from TC to address the needs of the kids. So I don't think you can contribute that all to just a TC project school. I think it's a whole district, kind of initiative. But that to me is a huge shift. And last year when the coaches were doing, student-centered coaching, the shift that, there was a huge shift with teachers. So it wasn't, I'm going to teach you how to teach this unit. It was, I'm going to teach you how to figure out what your kids need and use these materials to address those needs. That's a huge celebration.
It's awesome. So, yeah, that's exactly what I was looking for. Thank you. Just,
You're welcome.
I know people have asked like, oh, we're spending so much money and is it really working? And that's a good nutshell of, yes, it is.
It is. That's a short answer, Gretchen. Yes, it's working.
The piece that I would add to that is around the strategy related to staffing. Because we are concerned and have been concerned about learning recovery, my interest, I think our interest in retaining some of our classroom staff is really directed towards keeping our average class sizes as low as we can manage. And so what we're projecting for Millard Driscoll across the board next year, K1 and 2, are class 18. Obviously enrollment is an unknown, but the thinking there is that, as we know, and Kathy has been describing in great detail, our teachers do quite a bit more diagnostic work and exponentially more work with individual students and students in small groups. And so trying to manage the sizes that gives them, additional time and space to work with individual kids or small groups of kids will address, at least partially, concerns that may emerge around learning recovery and allow them to intervene more effectively. So I'm just looking at the average class sizes over the last 10 years. In grade 2, they've run, anywhere from on the low side 20 to about 22. And so, particularly at that grade level, the way we're forecasting, we're talking about substantially smaller classes, at least for next year. And I think that the logic is sound.
So grade 2 would also be around 18?
Yeah, I think the way that we had set that up, we were looking at about 18 at each grade level.
K1 and 2. Okay.
Correct.
Okay. So, yeah. All right. Thanks.
Kathy,
Are
can
there
I
any
switch to
questions,
questions?
Jen? Yeah.
Yeah, I've got two. Kathy, my first question would be, is there anything that we can ask that's in your budget that we could ask the PTA to help cover? I don't know what Millard Driscoll's, how they carry their money, but I feel like in the past, there's been substantial amounts of money that carry from year to year, as opposed to actually using that money for something beneficial. And I know there's a lot of things on here that would benefit the entire school. I know that's one of the other things where everybody tries to, pick something that would benefit as many people as possible in a school. And I know there's some things on here that maybe they would be willing to, help out with that would help us decrease our increase this year.
I think I don't.
You don't
I
have to give me the
I
answer
don't
right
know,
now.
but I will say, you know,
Something to think about.
yeah, they've been extremely supportive around books,
Yep.
so literature. And as Freya knows, every time we put in the monies to improve our library collection and bring it up to date, that always just seems to get cut. And so I will say, you know, with the book fair money and other money that the PTA raises, you know, they are very supportive when we, you know, when we're looking at enhancing classroom libraries or again, literature around, you know, that's a little more culturally diverse and things like that. I still though think it needs to be in the budget because I think our library, you're welcome, Fran. I think our library collection, like it really needs a little bit of a zhuzh there. So, but
we have gone up from collection ages of 1998 to 2006, but that's still a fairly older collection. So we're working on it, but you can't really cut it and not expect the collection age to suffer.
And like I like to say, would you go back to the cell phone that you had in 2006? Probably not. So you think like 2006, that's not that old, but then when you think about what your cell phone looked like back then.
My other question would be if there were two things that, and you can think about this and let us know later, but if there were two things from your budget that you had to cut, what would it be?
Oh, Jen. No. All right, I'll think about that.
And think about it. Thanks.
Thank you. All right, Doug.
Yeah.
Great. If
We're all ready for cider milk?
Yep. Go for it, Jen.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time. We need to kind of keep moving. So thanks, Kathy, and welcome, Jen.
Okay. Hi, everyone. First, just a little bit of celebration. Just the students and the staff in the middle of all this crazy pandemic have just been spectacular. We also, I've just been speaking to Kevin, just a little worried about class sizes and everything because we have had such a transition of students from remote coming back on site. We've had a couple clusters of learning pods who were unenrolled coming back. So yeah, very excited. And it's kind of nice listening to the families. I met with a cluster of parents today and, you know, they're just so thrilled with how the district at large has been handling and communicating. You know, I know there's a little bit of regret actually for actually not sending the students. So that kind of felt good and we're ready to accept them and excited to have them back here. So I'm just gonna do a brief kind of overview of like our focus this year. Obviously, we really started off with a lot of pandemic logistics, blended learning, because at Cider Mill, I think we definitely rely on Schoology a lot more to keep a cohesive instruction for not only our remote, but even our on-site learners. And there's a lot of fluidity you know, for the students, and that's definitely afforded us to keep our learners actively engaged in the learning process, no matter what's going on. Additionally, like Kathy, the whole idea of well-being for not only our staff, but definitely our students. We're starting to, actually, you'll see a thread going into next year, but increase kind of like a look into trauma training, just as we're trying to look at some of these learners who have experienced some more challenge from this pandemic. Going into next year, we are continuing a lot of the focus that has been our priority going through the last few years with a little bit of tweaking. So our three big areas of improvement are, again, like Kathy, the SEL, the connectedness and the well-being, academic achievement with a focus on math, priority of focus in math, and then also the blended learning environment still with coaching, but also looking at the area of coaching in the areas of literacy, math, and the LLC. They've been a huge part of the coaching process here as we've transitioned into a true blended learning environment. Looking into next year, some of the highlights that I'll just kind of quickly go over, and you guys can, you're welcome to stop and ask questions. I did get the questions a bit ago and tried to weave some of the answers in, so, but you're welcome to stop me. We do have our enrollment slowly kind of has been declining, and we have reached the spot where with the number of sections that we have, a lot of it has to do with sectioning, that we are able to go down a 0.5 in the area of PE, math, and art. I don't want to be very, very clear that this does not impact programming in those areas whatsoever. What is impacted is when I've had these weird holes, if you ever built a schedule, we have had those staff members support enrichment. Unfortunately, due to COVID, we were not able to do that this year. And just looking at the budget kind of like going forward and my priorities, I decided to transition one of those full times into the math interventionist, which I'll talk about in a minute. One of the things that I'll get to in a sec too is that we are looking at a different type of enrichment. I'll get to that in a second. So any question on that? I know that that's probably going to be a big question, and I just want to be very clear that that reduction is not impacting what the students are receiving in the areas of art, music, and PE at all. Okay. Another area of focus for us continues to be this learning cycle, or our IETs, specifically having a very strong second year focus on math achievement. That's the push for why I've included the math interventionist. In the school improvement area, the training is included for math professional learning. And we're also looking to continue our emphasis on student-centered coaching in that area. Another area is the ongoing work in equity and diversity. You'll see a couple of lines where we're trying to increase resources in not only ELA, but social studies and the special areas have had a huge impact in this work. And also there's a little bit of increase in the parent engagement lines because we are just now creating a school-based team, which will include some parents. A big area is engagement and access to student learning through the blended learning environment. And I kind of have 3 different kind of sub areas in there. One is digital resources. We have found that through this year, we've definitely needed some more specialized apps, specifically in areas of music, LLC, world language. And then going into next year, we are going to continue with Renzulli because that'll be the basis. We're hoping for a pilot for our enrichment, because we won't have that any longer, for a passion fair project. So we have a lot to kind of just work through that. As you know, when Kevin Meehan was here, we had that kind of like, oh my goodness, I can't even remember what it was called, but it was everybody did the same project and we really kind of phased that out. And so, you know, we're trying to look into something a little more 21st century, a little more innovative. And so we are looking into piloting, at least with 5th grade, a passion project there. The second area, which I know somebody had mentioned, was a little bit of an increase. It's not that significant, but in memberships. One of the reasons why you see that is because in the areas of guidance, ELA, PE, and instructional coaches, they had been completely cut from the year before. Remember, that was also a tough budget year, and so there had been some significant cuts to that the prior year, and so that was just about half of it was trying to regroup for those areas. So for those non-classroom staff members, the dues and professional learning that you see targeted for those staff members, it's not really a big amount per content area, I guess I should say, but it's really important because when we bring in a lot of training, it's really targeted towards the classroom teachers. And there's not a lot of kind of whole school, whole district even kind of planning for these staff members. And so with the $100 for like dues, and I don't think anybody has more than that in those special areas, and the little bit of professional learning, that is really what they get. for their learning as a system. So somebody had asked the little bit of increase there, and so I don't know if somebody wants to follow up with a more specific question on that. I don't know whose question that was.
No, that was my question. And again, it was just the relative increase, but you've explained it. Thanks.
Okay. And so the next one is an increase in the professional learning training conference. Again, a huge impact was the significant amount that was cut the year before as we were making changes, but the monies will be spent towards a wide variety of training. First, music, science, and PE all had their individualized training cut the year before. Our school counselor and one psychologist are going to trauma training, hopefully. A huge chunk of that, so a little bit over 10,000, is going to go towards hopefully our continued work with Marie Marie Alcock, thank you. We had started a lot of really important work on transforming a lot of our curriculum into more of a transdisciplinary project where learning is more cohesive and meaningful for our kids and not so isolated. I really hope to go back to this and continue that work. It is a heavy lift because our staff are used to teaching in isolation. But in the end, I think it's going to have a huge impact on student learning and student engagement. And just when you think about the portrait of the graduate, that is really, this type of learning really addresses what we want for our students. And so I'm really hoping to continue that work. There's a little bit of training for the Passion Project Fair as we look to replace the current WIN enrichment program. Like Kathy, we're trying to train additional levels of Orton Gillingham. All of our special ed and reading have the at least teacher level. I think that's what it's called, the teacher level. So we're looking for our 5 more to have the associate level training. And then we also implemented this year as part of the trying to figure out where our students were as they came back from the summer. We integrated the Dibbles, the Haggerty. We did have one training with Kathy's team actually on the Haggerty, but really no training at all on the Dibbles. And so if we're going to continue to have these new early literacy assessments and tools to see where our learners are, I want to be able to provide the training so that our teachers know how to optimize that data and respond to instruction during the learning cycle. So moving on to another target that I sort of mentioned as being a focus was the mental and physical well-being of staff and students. We're looking to continue all of the work with with Ruler and the tools, and then also the additional trauma training that we had mentioned. I mentioned the early literacy assessments. So like Kathy, we're in our 3rd year for the project school. I think if you look across, or I should say back vertically to where our ELA scores were before this work, both in SBAC and in MAP, you'll see a steady growth. Even this year with the pandemic, the ELA scores were very positive. And I think that really, workshop, and Kathy, when I'm not going to go into the whole comprehensive literacy, but it's authentic reading and it provides them the opportunity to actually do the work. Our students here at Wilton Public Schools are actually readers and writers because of this. And, I think when I first got here, I don't know if I could have said that. The work is so much more authentic over the years that I've been here, and TC has truly been a huge part of that. And just by being part of that process, you get up to date curriculum, there's think tanks. It's just, that is an unbelievable asset to our community that we are part of that project. Okay, I tried to go real fast. So I think I integrated, there was a couple other questions maybe. Let me see. I could give you more of a rationale. I think it's pretty clear. We have a huge math action plan. Why I'm requesting the interventionist. It's not just for learning loss. To be clear, I've been asking, really wanting this interventionist for quite some time. Currently, the interventionist is not able to support all of the students that are recommended for tier 2 and tier 3. And having, there's a million different ways that we could decide to either group by the kinds of learners, or we can do it by north-south, but we will much better be able to meet the needs of our learners with the additional staff person. And obviously somebody had asked, what will be the impact? Well, you're not going to service as many kids. So I think at this point, it's time to focus on this. We have 4 reading specialists, and I think for me, it's a priority. So,
can I ask a question?
Sure.
Do you know offhand how many kids were offered the supplemental program and how many took it up?
I could find that out for you. I do know that probably, if I were to take a guess, not even half
took it up.
Yeah.
Okay.
Ruth, I was supposed to be able to talk about that last week, but then you couldn't hear me talk about that. I think the program was slated for about 150 people, and there are 132 people as of when we had our teaching and learning committee meeting of how many kids took it up throughout the district.
Okay, but that's across the district.
I can tell you that I literally had to recruit students. We wanted to fill the seats to make it meaningful, but right. we had to recruit. I think a lot of it, though, might have a lot to do with the pandemic. Right now, it's still difficult if they're remote. They're not able to be on site, and to be able to do what we were doing, you're actually combining cohorts when they're on site. Yeah. So I think there were a lot of factors to it. Okay. I do like, Kathy, the program that they're using here is like the exemplars, and it's all based on problem solving, and it's been around for a while, and it's a great program. So I think it'll be interesting to see how and where we integrate components of it kind of going forward.
Okay.
And I don't know how you got your numbers, but you have 43 at Cider Mill. You have 18 in 3rd grade, 7 in 4th, and 18 in 5th.
Right. And so I think what I had shared is the ones that were invited was the question. So we didn't fill up, and so we recruited.
Okay. Recruited, so you took the next group of kids that we could have put in.
We took kids who maybe were in intervention, although the original pool said no intervention. We took people that we just thought needed support.
Okay. Kathy, is that the same at your school? This is totally off topic. I should ask you later.
Yeah, and I also know that we only have, we were slated 6 teachers. We only have 3 teachers. So to me, I just assume that there's less kids.
I was just curious, just in trying to think about what needs might become, September, like how many kids were able to catch up now versus, is it going to be a September project, like a fall project for next year?
I think that's a whole different kind of question. I mean, there's lots of ways to catch up kids that are more integrated into the work that they're doing during the day. There's a lot to be said for cohesive instruction and giving them just-in-time support for what they're learning. This is a separate program, which of course isn't going to hurt anybody, but it's not going to be targeted to the work that they're necessarily have missed or that they're actually working on and need a little bit extra support. So there's a lot to consider with this type of program.
Jen, can you talk about the numbers? Going back to the math interventionists, the number of students that are supported now, and just how many, adding another interventionist would do. And if you can't do it right now, that's okay.
Yeah.
But just
I should have thought to get that. I apologize.
That's okay. That can wait.
Yeah, let me get that for you.
What I can say is that in general, the caseloads for an interventionist are somewhere between 25 and 30 students.
Oh, that's a good way of looking at it. Yeah.
Right.
Okay, and so you're saying that double the number of kids need that.
Exactly. Like I know when we sit down to our SRBI meetings, it's literally having to pick and choose who can fit into the group. Because, you know, once you get up to like 7 or 8 kids, it's no longer an intervention, right? And so we have to make a lot of hard. We do that in reading too, but with math, it's really hard because we don't have the space.
Okay. Can you talk about class sizes the way, or maybe Kevin, you know, like what are the class sizes going to be for next year? Just to, I know apart from the math intervention program, but just in general, the recovery kind of environment.
Yep, we're looking at right now projecting 13 sections per grade level, 3, 4, and 5, with average class sizes of about 19 in grades 3 and 4 and about 21 in grade 5. Historically, those run kind of middle to the low of our historic class sizes across those grade levels. Grade 3 runs, 20, 21, 22 over the last 6 years. Grade 4 the same, grade 5 the same. So it's not quite the same magnitude as second grade, but we're talking, 1, maybe 2 kids fewer on average.
Okay.
Yeah, it is. I mean, we've been up to 20. Really, most of our classes have been 22. We've had a couple larger cohorts go through.
Okay. All right.
Frank,
Jen, did you have questions?
Yeah, I know. I'm trying to get off mute. It's just a question around that, and don't take this for anything other than what it is. Some teachers feel like having 18 kids in a class versus having 20 kids in a class doesn't make a difference to them. Do you guys truly think that having 2 extra kids or 1 extra kid or 1 less kid or 2 less kids truly makes that much of a difference?
If you're going to differentiate and meet with small groups, then 100%. If you're going to teach everything whole group, then no. But if you're going to differentiate and fit kids into just sheer time, if you just number it out and you organize, target different, areas of focus or strategies or skills or whatever for different kids, you just logistically can't meet the needs of groups of kids if you have the more students you have. I mean, just numerically, you can't do it.
Yeah, and I guess the only other piece I would add to that is, aside from, it depends. And if you go into the research is all over the place about, the power of smaller class sizes as a strategy. But the other, big variable here is the complexion of the class. And so, one variable I'm mindful of here in Wilton is our increasing prevalence rate of our special education students. And so we have more classes with more SPED kids. More SPED kids require, more personalized attention. And so when you inflate the numbers, even 1 kid, depending on his or her needs, could absolutely change the composition of a class. So I think hard to say, absolutely definitively, but I think we increase the odds of our teachers being more effective in terms of their interventions with individual kids and running small groups when we try to drive down the overall class size numbers.
Okay, and so my follow-up question, I guess, is I know some grades have more children in special ed than others. So our incoming 3rd, 4th, and 5th graders, how are we comparing to this year?
Yeah, I'd have to go back and look at those, but we typically see higher, and Andre could speak to this better than I could, but we see pretty high referral rates beginning in grade 3. And so, Cider Mill looks very different from Miller Driscoll in terms of the kind of special education prevalence perspective. But Andre, go ahead.
True. But I anticipate that the implementation of the Haggerty curriculum and the phonemic and phonological awareness and the word work pieces that are going on, and, bringing in the expertise of and, training up some of our staff around Orton Gillingham, not only to provide intervention to students who might need it, but also to make sure that all of our classroom teachers have the core operating system understanding that Orton Gillingham brings. And it's an operating system issue, that systematic instructional issue around phonics. that would be supportive of everything going on in the comprehensive literacy program. So I anticipate that we'll begin to see a lessening. We're talking about over time now, right? They're just beginning this process at Miller Driscoll right now. So
Sure.
we're talking, I would expect by the time this year's kindergarten class is coming out of second grade, we're going to start to see a reduction in the number of students, particularly being referred around dyslexia, because they will have had these basic building blocks underneath them of phonemic and phonological awareness, that if you miss those at those early grades, what you get is a dyslexic, a student at third grade who may look dyslexic due to a lack of instruction way back when, right? They may not have a neurobiologically based dyslexia, but they look very much dyslexic and need to go back to the drawing board of that kind of instruction. So I'm hopeful that with the new ELA curriculum and how it's really fleshed out that piece, we're going to get a rate of return when this, it's going to start next year with the kids who got a little bit this year, but that kindergarten class is the class I'm going to watch. That's the class I'm going to watch coming through. And as they get to third and fourth grade, to see whether or not we've seen the impact that we're hoping to see based on the implementation of this work. In terms of the prevalence rate of special education, I think we still have, I would say there are, if you look at the 13 categories of disability in IDEA, most of them are pretty stable. They're pretty stable in terms of overall prevalence rate. The increase happens in learning disabilities, the increase happens in attention deficit disorder, and the increase happens in social and emotional, the emotionally disturbed area. Even our kids with autism, that trajectory that was happening over time is stabilized. It's higher, but it's stabilized. I really worry about the instructional piece on the learning disability side, and then the behavioral piece, and executive functioning pieces that are established on the ADD, ADHD, and SED side. Those are the areas that I have the most concern about.
Okay, thanks.
So there were a couple, oops.
Just out of curiosity, are we seeing like an increase in need for like, I guess, executive functioning and SEL type resources given kind of this operational upheaval of, of changing the school model and then projecting kind of going back to September? What,
the increase
kind of, which should be like kind of like a return to like full-time, school mode?
Well, I think my sense of what's happened this year is it's brought executive functioning issues into much more specific relief because they've been so heavily taxed. So students who had, who may have been able in a more typical year, may have been able to kind of float along with the support available in face-to-face instruction with their classroom teacher, with all of the supports available to them. Going into remote learning, hybrid learning, the adjustments that have had to be made, all of those things have taxed executive functioning in ways that they typically aren't taxed pre-K all the way through grade 12. And so what you're seeing is, and by the way, it's happened to all of us. So if any of you have had trouble with your executive functioning, you are not alone. It is happening across the population because of what's happening in terms of the impact of the pandemic and the adjustments and the uncertainty and all of these things that have happened to us all. So young people who have a mild weakness or a mild challenge in that executive functioning area are struggling and have struggled. So we're going to have to help them and develop and think about executive functioning in a whole new way, because I think teachers and parents have now seen it. They're starting to say something, you know, we need something here to help support shifting set, to help support what do I do at first point of difficulty if I don't have someone immediately there to help me? How do I address that? All of those things are now being seen by teachers and parents in ways they have never been seen before, because we had these scaffolds that built around kids all the time. And so we will need, and you know, Chuck and I have discussed this, and we've talked about, you know, really thinking about executive functioning across the curriculum, not as a separate thing, but as something that becomes embedded in the core curriculum of the Wilton Public Schools, so that we all have a good understanding of what executive functioning means, what is age-appropriate executive functioning, and how can we scaffold it up to independence, so that we're not scaffolding to the point where kids depend on something that if a person is not there, they fall apart. So we want to think about that as we think about the portrait of the graduate, and that I'm gonna flub the words, but it's the self-directed expert learner, right? That person has good executive functioning skills. And so we're going to need to think about that in terms of how we teach it, how we, what the expectation set is at pre-K all the way through grade 12, and how we can monitor and assess it and support it instructionally. And through assistive technologies and digital resources and all kinds of ways to support it. Sorry.
Okay.
Got on a roll.
I know. It was good though. It's all true. It's all true. All right. Let me just finish up a couple of these questions that I think you guys had put in here. Let's see. The large increase. There were some things about the boiler and AC repair. I'm going to let Jose. Kevin, he has his own meeting with the group, right?
Later in the week, we'll do it as part of the central office.
Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
I do believe somewhere in there, there is an increase, and I'm pretty sure the canopy is in there, but I know there were still a lot of conversations with the town and seeing kind of where that particular item landed. So I'll let Kevin and Jose kind of follow up on that, but that should be the only really big increase in kind of like environmental repairs. And then there was a question about library books and just the formula. So, I mean, technically the formula would be $20 per student. Obviously, we're not there. That is definitely something, you know, I think we're in the same boat where Kathy is. I know we've worked hard to get our circulation up to date, but, you know, we're in the same position where, you know, we kind of reduce that every year, but there is a formula. I think that was it. Any questions for me?
Yeah, I have a couple.
Sure.
One's, you know, focuses on the library. You know, we have for years been behind the 8 ball in terms of the currency of our collection. You've got the same amount budgeted this year that you had last year, both you and at both Soddermill and Miller. You know, we've got to make that investment. So Kevin, I would challenge you to find a way, and we can't catch up in 1 year, certainly, but we've got to make an effort to try and accelerate and get back on track. And Fran can give us guidance on that, and what it would take and what it needs. But we've got to get our collections as close to up to date as we can possibly get, because we are still way behind. We made an effort, I think, maybe 2 years ago, a fairly significant move to try and update, but we're still behind the 8 ball. And we've got to get that improved. We really do. I feel strongly about that. And the other question, Jen, is classroom teachers. Your salaries in classroom teachers are up $334,000 over this current year. If I look at the current year, it's $3.5 million to take 3%, and that's $105,000. We're adding technically only half a teacher because we reduced to half in art and music, et cetera, to offset the one increase in the interventionist. So if we paid that teacher $100,000, that's $50,000. Where's the other 200? You're up 334,000.
We're actually down 0.5, not up.
Where?
No.
I'm looking at classroom teachers.
What is
You're
it?
up
Kevin?
9.5%.
You added the fifth grade teacher this year, and the
Oh, I'm forgetting that that was added. Sorry.
+2 minus 1.5.
Yeah, yep.
Yep.
All right,
Sorry.
well, I'm looking at
not
our
adding
current budget is $3.5 million, which should reflect the additions we made, okay? Or doesn't? Maybe it doesn't.
No, it
that.
does.
No, I forgot.
Okay.
It does.
So-
Sorry about
so-
that.
All right, so if I take $3.5 million, 3% is $105,000. I take half, which is a net increase. We're not a full increase, but it's a net increase of about half a teacher for the math interventionist because we did reduce by half. Say it's $100,000, that's $50,000. Where does the other $180,000 of increases in classroom salaries come from? I can't make the math work. I can't make the numbers work.
Go ahead, Marianne.
The way that we do the salaries is we take the exact staff members and where they are there at the current time and then move them on the steps. Some people are going back to school, going back and bumping into a different lane, not just a step. They're going from a master's to a 6-year. So you'd have to see the differences from teacher to teacher.
Yeah, I'd like for somebody to look at that.
Coming in, and I could put something together for you to see that, to see where the increase is coming in.
There's something going on there. I don't know if all of your teachers moved to a full step or a full lane or not, but it's $150,000 of increase greater than what I would have expected it to be.
Okay.
So an average of like teacher going from a master's 6-year program, what is that bump in salary? Is that like a 8% or?
Right. So if a master's 14 teacher goes up to a 6-year, it's going to be a $15,000 step if they were at the top of the level.
Okay,
so
so
depending
if you
upon,
have like 10 of those, that covers what he's asking.
So, but what I'm saying is, so what I do is I take the exact level where they are, and then what the addition is. The addition for a new teacher is about 100,000. So let me pull together who we had where and show you where the increase is coming in.
Yeah, because it's significant. It's much bigger than any of the other schools. You know, in terms of so.
I have highly trained staff, Glenn.
Yeah,
obviously you must. Yeah.
And there's also just another one to think about on a budgetary basis from outside of teacher contracts. When you have 12-month employees at the different schools, depending on the day count in the year for the full year, not a teacher year, you can actually have another day's salary in there. So someone might make 50,000, just say, but because of the accounting day count in a budgetary basis, that person could make the budgetary effect is 51,000.
Yeah.
I don't want to get too much in the weeds, but there is also that. So we'll be able to, like Marianne said, we'll be able to narrow all that down for you.
Yeah, because it really is. I mean, it's going from $3.5 million this year to $3,835,000 next year. That's a big jump.
Yeah. You can see if you go into the teacher's contract and look at the step schedule for 21.
I'm just asking the question. I'd like to understand that better.
Yep, we'll give you the specific number of people, but you can, when you look either, down the columns or across, you can see, there are certain steps where the jump is, well beyond.
more significant.
Yeah, it's like, in some cases, 4% or more. So I'm just, as you.
Even 4% wouldn't make the difference.
Well, again, depending on how many people you have there. But yeah, we take your question.
Yeah. Okay, good. Thank you. And again, my comment about the library, I don't know how we address that, but I think it's something that we really need to take a hard look at. And it's true for all the schools, basically.
Cider Mill has the lowest age of collection, just as an FYI. It's at 2005. The rest of the schools are a little bit better.
Then we need to get something done if we can find a way to just, and to Jen's point, the PTAs hopefully could help there or something, but we really need to address that because we keep falling. It's like deferred maintenance. Eventually you're going to have to pay the piper, and I'd rather do it in small bits and small pieces to try to get us there than wait until the roof falls in and we've got a major problem.
Thank you, guys.
Kevin, you had talked about putting some money into the budget to cover, in the sort of like a contingency if in fact enrollment itself was bigger than projected.
Yeah,
do you know where those funds are?
yeah, that's just sitting in the general salary line.
Mhm.
So that's I don't know, Marianne, you'd have to tell
Yep,
us.
it's between Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill.
Okay.
So again, so that's where we had the contingency. It would be in the 40305
Okay.
line that you're questioning. So, but there's a couple things with those lines that I want to review with you guys, but I'll let you finish these questions first.
Sure. Okay. All right. Any more Cider Mill questions? Because I'm looking at the time.
Yeah, Jen, I have the same questions I asked earlier. Let's see what we could utilize our PTA and ask for. And if there were two things that you had to cut, what would they be?
So the PTA question I know is an interesting one. I know that, we've always kind of gone, they're designed to not to be supportive of things that aren't budgetary. And so there's a real fine line with what we kind of put forward for grants. They're never in the category of what should be covered by a school budget. That's, so that would be something that, maybe Kevin and our PTAs can talk about. I know that I think it's part of their guidelines, but I'm not exactly sure.
Well, their charters to supplement and enrich, not supplant.
Yeah. So.
Right. But certainly worth a conversation.
Definitely.
It's only because I'm just looking at some of the things on here, and I think they are to supplement and enrich. It's not things that we have to have, it's things to make our school better. But you can cut back to me on your other two things. I'm not really asking for an answer right now, just something to think about. Thanks.
Sure.
So Glenn, part of the increase in the 40305 is going to be answered when we answer the questions that you guys had already submitted. You've got 4 main salary accounts as far as how we break things up in New World. The 40305 is the general salary. The 40311 is a stipend account. The 40315 is additional time, which we would consider additional time overtime for classified staff. The 40317 would be additional time for certified staff. $90,000 was moved from 40315 for cafe aides to 40305. So I just want to, I want you guys to be aware of some of this. Some of the changes that you're seeing on these lines are not new additions. They're reallocating things to be in the appropriate places. So, and I can outline that for you so that you can see that.
All right, thanks. That may
Okay.
be the answer. Yeah.
Okay, so right, but I will still go through the teacher line for you so that you can see the increase for the teachers themselves.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
I appreciate that.
Yeah,
Yeah, this is a big
Okay.
increase there. It's just I can't make
Yep.
the numbers work.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Any other Cider Mill questions? And thank you, Marianne, for talking about the salary allocations and getting some more detail.
Yep.
All right. Kevin, is it time for Andrea?
We are ready for Andrea Leonardi.
Okay.
All right, 35 minutes for special ed. Let's go. Okay. So
And I'm the one who
special ed.
asked for a longer time on it.
I'm
Call
perfectly
it part
happy.
1.
Part 1. Okay, so I will try to be very quick. I think you've heard me over the past year talk about how incredibly proud I am of the department for all that they've done throughout the pandemic, both to work in direct service to students, but also in building relationships with our families. It has been an extraordinary time of building and creation and innovation and creativity between parents and teachers, all teachers, not just special ed teachers, but special ed and related service staff have really stepped up to this idea of meeting the students where they are, meeting the families where they are, and really making a difference in the lives of these kids and their families. As always, Our focus has been on and continues to be on closing the achievement gap that's apparent, the academic achievement gap in reading and math. We continue to focus, although we took a bit of a moratorium on further training in our Orton Gillingham work and some of the math work that we had planned for this period of time, simply because we could not tax the teachers anymore in learning new material. They were working full on with kids and families. But our intent is to continue that work. We will continue to support the work of Orton Gillingham, and I celebrate both Kathy and Jen for working with us to increase the level of expertise around Orton Gillingham as an operating system to help support the word work and the work going on at the elementary school level in literacy. And we will continue to do that with our special ed staff and the literacy specialists. That also includes all of the assessment work. So when Jen mentioned the training in the DIBELS or the Hegarty or those kinds of pieces, special ed will also be involved and continue to be involved in doing that work in collaboration with Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill. Math is the next on our agenda. So one of the things that we're moving into, we wanted to do it this year, but again, it took a back seat to all the work we were doing, is we really want to take a deep dive into the diagnostics around mathematics, particularly when looking at when math becomes a disability. Right now, there's a bit of a disconnect between some of the assessment and evaluation tools used to assess mathematics and what's actually being done in the classroom. So there's a bit of a disconnect there, and we want to do a deep dive in research and development and looking at how can we start to understand math and the impact of disability on mathematics instruction and mathematics learning. And so we want to take a deep dive into that and then look at specialized instructional strategies that can help fill in those gaps. So that's a big piece of our work next year. As always, we add, we're looking to create independence among our kids. So we want to teach skills and competencies to allow our students to access and fully benefit from the general education environment. We also have a wide spectrum of students. So we think about our students, our complex learners and our most complex learners, in making sure that across the grade span and the age span, there is a continuity of learning that leads them to a life of independence, choice, and dignity, and community participation. And so we continue to do that work with our collaborative centers, which now span the entire pre-K through 22 spectrum. And we will be, and those groups of teachers and related services folks meet to make sure that there is a through line and a continuum from preschool all the way up, so that those 18 years are a collaboration to allow that 22-year-old to step into the community as a fully participating member of our community. Looking at some of your questions, number 10 is my favorite question on the sheet because I get to say this. You're asking me about tuition and why there's such a decrease in tuition from 2019 to now. It's a good Jeopardy question. Guess when Genesis arrived in town? The genesis of Genesis was 2019. And so that cost avoidance strategy that you heard me talk about back in 2019 has really borne out. We have not seen a dramatic increase in our tuition. The tuition increases are really just, it's a very stable, unlike in the past, that account has been pretty stable because we know we know the areas we still need to use private schools for, but we're not sending as many students out to those therapeutic day schools that we used to send kids out to quite frequently. And we brought back some kids from those from those schools over the course of a couple of years, very successfully. And so Genesis has kind of helped stabilize that account, and really that cost avoidance strategy, while Genesis is not free, it does have cost, and you'll see that in some of the as part of some of the transportation increases. It really has borne out as a good cost avoidance strategy, having a program internal to the district. In terms of, there was a big question about transportation. The biggest piece of the transportation increase that was in line 49,630 is our bus monitors. There are 3 bus monitors that we've had to look to our transportation providers. We were unable to, in the past, we would try to use our paraprofessionals through additional time to ride the buses with kids who needed bus monitors. And that was nearly impossible to manage on a day-to-day basis. And so we worked with the transportation company, and they are now providing the bus monitors, those 3 bus monitors, and that's the cost. There's also a small increases for Genesis and Community Steps. That's based with the increasing numbers of students in both programs and how far they are away from each other geographically in Wilton. We've needed additional vans here and there. Although Community Steps and Genesis, we bring those kids together as much as possible to ride that transportation. Then there was a question about paraprofessional staffing. This fall, after the budget process, of course, and with the influx of new families moving into Wilton, we had 2 students move into Wilton, one at Miller Driscoll and one at Cider Mill, who had were complex learners, who are complex learners, and had need of paraprofessional assistance. And since we approved budget to the next budget, those show as increases. So that's 2 of the 3 requested increases. And the third is an additional paraprofessional we are requesting for Community Steps. There will be 5 new students in Community Steps in the fall, for a total of 11. And we need an additional job coach out into the community so that those kids can get their needs met. So those are the 3, 2 of the 3 requests are paras who are currently working at Miller Driscoll and Cider Mill. And we want to retain those for those students. And the third is for job coach at Community Steps. I think my rant before got to the projected and prevalence rates. I can show you, I can give you charts on the prevalence rates, and we can do that over time. So I can give that to you if you want more information about the prevalence rate. I will tell you the concern I have moving forward, and this kind of coincides with the COVID question. I have concerns about students, particularly at the secondary level, middle and high school, who are going to struggle to recover as quickly in terms of their own mental health and emotional health. So I am concerned about the rising level of need that we will see in that domain. This is not kind of general COVID response. This is going to be the kids who may exhibit signs of post-traumatic stress disorder as a result of this time. And so we may see a bump in referrals as the pandemic crisis starts to abate and the community moves into more of a COVID recovery phase. We're going to see students across the grade levels who are going to exhibit signs of PTSD, and we're going to have to intervene with that, whether it's in special education or not. We're going to need to have the resources to intervene. In doing so, we asked for an additional half-time social worker to remain at the high school. I would expect a year from now, you're going to hear me propose asking for additional resources at Middlebrook next. That does not mean that Cider Mill and Miller Driscoll don't need it, but the most intense need right now is at the middle and high school level. But over the next couple of years, we're going to need to rethink and relook at how we manage the mental health issues across the district.
Andrea, can I jump in and ask a question? When
Sure.
you say PTSD, that's a pretty heavy duty, remarkable, dramatic term to use. So what does that look like at a high school or, maybe middle school level? When you say, they're going to exhibit signs of, we're more used to the war veteran kind of recovery movies and that sort of thing. But what's it look like in a school environment, and how sure are you of that?
Well, when you think about a PTSD, as you all know, is post-traumatic stress disorder. And when it becomes a disorder is when the bulk of the population in a time like this has recovered, and you're still exhibiting systems of a lower level of function. You don't go back to the same level of function you had pre-trauma. You don't recover as quickly. Now, for students, for some of our kids, it may mean they have some anxiety about returning to school. They have difficulty coming in and getting back up to speed in the same way as the bulk of the population does. They might experience heightened anxiety. They might experience mild kind of symptoms of kind of that obsessive compulsive germ. They might exhibit some of those symptoms. Those are the kinds of things we're all watching very carefully as we begin this recovery process, to see about kids who are having difficulty getting to class, kids who are going to the nurse more often, kids who are worried about, who have excessive worries about, about disease, about, any one of a number of things, kids who have difficulty managing the day-to-day expectations in the academic world because they're busy, worried about other things. That's what so I don't mean it in the same level of a war veteran's PTSD. PTSD is really about not recovering and having difficulty recovering, and we're going to need to intervene. I would imagine we'll see an increase in school avoidance for some kids. Difficulty coming to school and staying in class all day. Those are some of the things we're anticipating.
Just one more related question. Do you see any need to continue or offer or support students through any kind of the remote learning kind of situation? Will there be kids that need that? Are we prepared for that if that's true? Or is that something we want to avoid at all costs? I don't mean, physical costs. I just mean that's just not a good idea, period.
Understood. There are kids who are thriving in the remote learning environment. There are kids who love it. And there are kids who are learning and really doing quite well in that environment. Even in the hybrid environment, they like the flexibility of it. So there are kids who are doing very, very well under those circumstances. They might have trouble coming back to something more traditional. And so I'm a special ed person, right? So I like individualization. That's my thing. So I think we should meet kids where they are and help them realize the standards from there. I'd be careful though. I'd want to be careful to monitor and make sure that students were selecting into that, not avoiding something else, and make sure that we were meeting their needs appropriately. But I think there's going to come a time, the new normal is going to require we all be more flexible across a broad spectrum of things. And that's not just in special education. So remote learning might be something we need to think about as a district, being available beyond the scope of COVID. But that's going to be, that's going to be a part of our discussions over time. We now have the resources and we know it can be done well. So.
Yeah, my question was, if the need arose, do we have the resources still available or the funds still available to be flexible, in terms of hybrid, remote, whatever kind of balance might be needed or formula might be needed for any particular situation. So I guess that's more of a technology question down the road, but do we just pack up all the cameras and go home, or what do we do with them?
Right.
What's the future of learning?
Right.
Well, I was going to ask that kind of a broader question across the district, because, come September, we, presumably, fingers crossed, we'll be in a COVID recovery mode, but that doesn't really mean the same things for different ages of students, in terms of vaccine availability and what, medical conditions may or may not warrant. There still have not started clinical trials for under 12s, and 12s to 16s are just being looked at now. So just, making sure that the district has the resources, and we're kind of thinking about how, not every student will be a full return or be able to be a full return student, come September.
I think, these are big questions. And I think, speaking very globally, on one hand, I think there are many who are anticipating kind of this magical return to yesteryear. For lots of reasons, I think we need to talk through, what parts of that may be possible and what parts don't we want to be possible. But within that is a question that the State Department of Education has to answer, and that's about what its position will be on enabling families to participate fully remotely. There is I think an emerging push from across the state from some superintendents to try to let go of the remote learning environment, because they recognize for some of our staff just how challenging it is to manage both kids in person and kids at home. But to your point, Ruth, I think we can reasonably expect first that we're not going to be in the clear, and there may be some families who have, for very legitimate medical reasons, don't want to send or can't send their kids back to school in person. And so we need to prepare for that. To answer your question directly, we do have the technology and we're using it now. And so I think we are ready to manage whatever that population. The more complex question is, what does it look like? Because I don't know that if we don't have to choose, I don't think we would choose having hybrid options available across every classroom and every grade level, right, like we do now at Cider Mill Up. And then the other question is to Andrea's point. We know we have some students that are doing very well in a remote environment, and so how can we pivot to continue to provide high quality services to them so they can continue to thrive in that environment? So these are, we're really, I think, just scratching the surface in terms of exploring those questions. But that as we get into the spring here, you can expect much more.
But just from a resource perspective and a budget perspective, everything's kind of been allocated in a way that once we figure out what we do.
We're now talking about it's incidental replacement. All of our, with the exception of some of our older Chromebooks that we'd be replacing through a lease anyway. Cameras are new, the sound fields are new, things like that. So it's just catching up with break fix stuff.
Okay.
Okay, so there was a question about digital resources that really relates to the Presence Learning platform. And that question may answer, Jen, your question about what you might cut. If we cut anything, I might cut that. Remember, we built this budget a long time ago, and while I still think there's some utility to that program, especially if we're going to be doing things like teletherapy when students are out sick, or homebound instruction, or those kinds of things, it may be a cost center that we're going to need to reconsider as we go forward. So that's what it's really about, that teletherapy platform. There was a question about ESY and the reduction in contracted services. That is a true savings to the district. Come on, like no applause. There is a
No, I thought it was
special
a
ed is saving some money.
typo.
You know, we, with the support of Melissa and Sharon and Bernadette Hess, they have revamped our ESY program. They started this, 2 summers ago now, the summer before COVID. And then last summer was COVID summer. But this year we'll be implementing kind of a totally revamped ESY program to meet the needs of our students with disabilities, along with a kind of tuition-based program for our typically developing kids and our partners, and that will result in a savings to the district in that line item. So that is a savings. Congratulations, Sharon, Melissa, and tell Bernadette we said thank you.
Yeah. No, that's great news, and it sounds creative. Will we be hearing more about that later on this year?
You bet it's going to be a blast. It's
Okay.
very exciting. It's getting a lot of good feedback from the community as well. So
we've already filled up two of our 5 classes are already filled.
Oh, great, great.
And
okay.
we just opened it up last week. We're so
Okay.
excited. Definitely come by this summer.
Yeah, so maybe if the board could hear a short report, not now, but at some point,
Yep.
that'd be fun.
Yep, it'll be fun. It's a good opportunity. Then there's a question about the tuition line and the public school tuition line. Let me explain. When we make outplacements, we look at either private schools or there are public outplacements, typically in our regional educational service centers, CES, ACEs, within commutable distance. We hadn't had a student placed at CES in a few years. That's why that was at 0. And last year, at the end of the year, we placed a student at CES. So that's where that tuition increase is. So it's tuition is one whole line item that is subset between public and private. Does that make sense? And when we place someone at a CES, it would be in the public school line item. Then the question was, how do we project private tuition? So in order to project private tuition, we take all the students who are currently outplaced and we review each student. First and foremost, to see if there's a possibility to return them to the district. Second, to see if the program they're currently in remains appropriate for them. And so we look at that piece and we project where they'll stay or where they'll go. We also take all of our students who are graduating or aging out. So if a student is turning 22, that student would be removed from tuition and their tuition would go away. Or a student is graduating, their tuition would go away. Then we take the remaining students and we add an average of 4% increase to the line, because that's typically private schools increase their tuition by 3 to 5% each year. So we go with the middle number and add 4%. And then I add, this year I added 3 additional day placement tuitions for kids I might not know yet. For kids I might not know may need that, just to add a little bit of wiggle room in that line item so that we don't end up kind of out there. So that's how we budget. That's how I project moving forward. I remove the graduates and the students aging out, and I add in a little bit of extra wiggle room in the form of 3 day placement tuitions.
Right. I think my projection question was not only for next year, but you've kept it flat for the 2 years out. Is that just cause, or you haven't really looked at the kids yet?
It's hard to, it's a hard one to really guess, but I would, because it depends. If I end up with 3 or 4 more kids out, then it's going to bump up a little more. If I end up with 3 or 4 less, and we often have graduates, so it's a little harder to predict. But I can add, it's one of those, if I had to do it, I would just add 3 to 5% each year just to give you a flavor. It's hard to do it otherwise.
Yeah, no, I get it. I just don't want the question to be later on, how could you be so wrong, if it goes dramatically up or dramatically down, that's all. And sometimes we get those questions, so I just,
Understood.
needed to know. Thanks.
Mhm.
Andrea, a
Yep.
question, not necessarily tuition related, but the schools where we have students outplaced, have we been able to monitor or stay on top of how they're performing in this COVID crisis to make sure that their programs aren't slipping, that we're getting the services that we really should be getting and that we're contracted for? Have there been changes in any of those schools that have really fallen behind, or how are we staying on top of that?
Well, each student who is placed out has a Wilton Public Schools case manager.
Okay.
So they have a special educator who's assigned as their case manager, and one of us also supports those people in making sure that the students are making progress toward their goals and objectives, that their programs remain appropriate, and that they're getting the services that we're contracting and paying for.
Okay.
So we do monitor those students throughout the year. In terms of COVID, in the same ways that we have, had to make decisions on the fly. Most of the private schools have been in-person learning because they're so small.
Okay.
They have such small student bodies that they've been in-person learning. Certainly our students who are residentially placed have been living in residence. We've had a couple of kids have to go into quarantine, and their schools have done some remote learning, albeit the remote learning coming out of the private schools is far less robust than the remote learning coming out of Wilton.
But overall, you're happy, or you're comfortable with how this has impacted those students, and as much as can be.
As much as can be expected. I think that I think the schools have all rallied to do the best they can under these circumstances.
Okay, a couple of other questions, if I may. I would assume that your legal expenses come into your cost center area as under contracted services. Is that correct?
There's a separate line.
Yeah, but
Where does it show legal? Because I don't. Oh, I see. Yes, legal fees.
Yeah.
We've got a small bump there. Is that going to be sufficient, or should we be prepared, or should we, ask for more, knowing that we probably are going to have additional expenses there, more so than we had this year, or are we comfortable with it, that increase?
When budgeting, I added a little because I think we're going to see some increased legal actions around the post-COVID world.
Right.
Again, it's really, it's hard to say. It's just hard to say what that's going to look like. Still haven't gotten any feedback out of the state.
Okay.
It's just hard to say, and I didn't want to explode that budget.
Right.
Because I think we've done well in this environment.
I think so.
Say.
No question. All right, then my last question is related to Genesis. As I look at the budget book, our budget this year is $533,000. Our proposed budget for next year is $640,000. Yet the difference we're showing is a negative $25,000. That doesn't make any sense to me.
Doesn't make any sense.
I'm really confused by that.
Yeah, there's there is a bump in transportation.
That's outside of this budget.
Biggest piece in the Genesis budget would be we're moving the teachers. We're making it an 11-month program.
No, I understand. I'm saying.
No. So what is it? Wait, what did you say? You saying that you show a negative?
My book shows a negative 25,000 is the difference.
Something's wrong on that sheet, because you should show a positive. You should show an increase of 106.
My book doesn't show that.
Okay, because the page I'm looking at shows an increase of 106,867.
No, that's what I would have expected, but my book is showing 25,000.
So I'll work with Lucille to make sure that you have the right page there. Okay, because it should be an increase. It is not a decrease as a bottom line.
Yeah, no, I know. That's why I'm raising the question. I'm thinking, well, wait a minute, that doesn't work. Okay.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
The line that Glenn is reading is the same on my book as well.
Okay.
The negative.
Yeah, so there's just, it's just a little confusing. It must be a couple of other places.
Is that on the summary sheet? On the one?
No,
Yeah, it's
on
under
the,
total Genesis.
yeah.
I'm thinking it's the Excel summary sheet is what
Yes,
you're
it is.
describing to me.
Yeah.
But it should be a bottom line of 640,000.
Right.
Gotta
And
be-
it should be an increase of 106,867.
Yeah. But our sheets are showing negative 25,000.
Yeah,
Okay.
Excel made a mistake.
Like an error.
The
Well, Mary Ann
640,
put the wrong page in when she gave it to Lucille, but it should be an increase of 106,000.
Yeah,
great.
no, the
Okay.
numbers are right. The formula somehow got screwed up.
Guys, I have the correct page, so somehow it's just been.
You're special, Jen.
Yeah, I have the same.
I don't know why it's off.
Have Glenn have.
Well, there's been more than one version that's gone around, but so if you have the correct page, I'm thinking somehow you have something that's behind, a step behind that. But
Yeah.
that's okay. We'll work to get that there's only one out there.
All right,
Okay,
thank you
great.
much. Appreciate
Great.
it.
Okay. I'm looking at the time, so I'm wondering if there are any other questions for Andrea. I think you've gone through the questions that you got. Are there any more?
I have a general question. I think it applies across the entire budget, and particularly for Andrea's, it really jumped out at me. In the group insurance line, her group insurance is going up to almost $250,000, $224,000. And we're seeing significant increases in our group insurance in all the categories, in all of the locations. I don't understand why our group insurance is increasing 10% or 9% or whatever it is.
It's actually going up 6% year over year, or the broker is.
No way.
But it's a reallocation.
But the reason-
of the people of
Right.
how it was originally done
Right.
last year versus how it's done this year. Just so you understand, this year we have what's called a position control. It actually tracks every single position in the budget, and it tracks the expenditures related to it. We didn't have that ability to do it before, so it's more of an estimate. Now we know who's single, family. We know specifically where those people are located, and the cost goes with them. So in overall, it's a 6% increase in the benefit plan, but it's in between the different departments. It could be less in one and more in the other because it's a complete restatement based on where people are located.
All right, because it's just it seems significant in some areas, and it's up across the board, but in some areas it seems significant. Okay.
Right, because in some of those areas in the past, they might not have even had the benefits go with them to that area, and now it's showing there.
Truly.
Okay, got it. Thank you. Okay, that helps. Thank you much.
Kevin, I had one question, and I'm sort of building off of Jen's question, because I think some of the question should be generalized, rather than, only come from individual sites. That if you needed to reduce our budget overall and bring it to lower than the 392 increase, where as a team, including principals, of course, but, you have to coordinate it all. So what would, we can tell that you have squeezed a lot out already, in terms of some of the lines, but it's still a large increase. So if you had to bring it down further, what would that do so the board could understand the impact of what that meant?
You want me to put together just a kind of a brief summary of some of my initial thinking? Just for the sake of the
because if I guess, and again, I'm speaking just as one board member, but given such a large increase, I would feel better knowing that whatever's there is absolutely essential for next year, and either can't be deferred, can't be combined, can't be eliminated, can't be, paced in smaller chunks, whatever the approach is. And what kind of difficult decisions it might entail for us as a board.
Okay. Yeah.
That's probably the most awkward question I have ever asked. So, I'm just on a roll here today in terms of not being able to be clear. But trying to say, I don't read it and say, oh my gosh, we don't need to do that next year. But, where could some pressure to reduce B, or do we bump up immediately into things we absolutely don't want to do? So I'm just trying to get a sense of where that happens.
Yeah, I think I'll put that in writing and kind of lay out for you. The way that I think about it is, if we were to do and I know this is not what you're asking, but a 1 point reduction is about 860,000. So we would look at, going back and squeezing some of those non-personnel accounts. We've done that year over year. So there's really, not much that we would get out of those accounts. There's 60,000 sitting in Middlebrook to address the bathrooms. So that would be a question of, can we kick that can down the road yet another year? And then we're into personnel. And then it becomes a question of how do we approach some of those personnel decisions? So do we defer a math interventionist? Do we let go of some existing positions? But I'll lay that out for folks, and we can kind of take it all as one conversation. And
I just think that's important for the board to be able to discuss, deferring is okay or not okay. Cutting is okay, not okay. Just what the damage and the impact is, given what, we approved our goals, we approved the budget assumptions. We're just looking at the increase and trying to say, is that absolutely the best we can do? And let's see where that leads us a little bit.
Okay.
I'm just going to interrupt for a second and just say thank you to everyone, but I have a Miller Driscoll kid to pick up. So we'll see you, for the next one tomorrow. Thank you.
Thank you.
Kevin, I think to that point, and the reason I keep asking the question is that it's a large increase, and I know that we've cut for how many years in the past, but it's also coming at a really inopportune time for our town, because you're looking at a lot of parents who are either still out of a job or who took a significant pay cut, and then to present them with a huge increase that we haven't seen over many years is just going to be hard for some people to swallow and for them to understand. So if there are, and I'm not saying we need to do away with stuff, I'm just saying what are your priorities, and figure out what our priorities are and what are wish items. And it might come down to, I'm not saying cut personnel, and I'm not saying cut your math interventionists, because I think that's important, but there might be some other things that maybe we need to look at other resources that in a traditional year, we wouldn't typically ask a PTA to help out with, but these aren't typical times either. So if there's a way to kind of, figure it out, or to put it in front of us a different way so that we have something to stand on and to report back to others when they're asking us, we'd appreciate it.
Okay. So Kevin, was there anything else we needed to go over this afternoon?
We have addressed our agenda, and so
okay.
We'll pick up tomorrow. I think we start with Middlebrook tomorrow.
Okay. All right. And so if we can, we'll try to get questions ahead of time. We'll do the best we can in terms of as board members. Okay.
Sure.
If I can just ask that some of the questions had the account line item you were looking at and some didn't. So if you're going to ask a question, could you just put the line item there so it directs our eyes right to the right area? Otherwise, we're swimming all over the place.
Okay. Fair enough.
Thank you.
All right. Thank you. All right. And again, thanks to everybody. We know how much work this is. So thank you. And we'll see you tomorrow.
See you tomorrow.
Guys.
Thanks, everybody.
See you tomorrow.
Thanks. We're adjourned.